So we're going to listen now to the nation's brightest speaker on the perpetual challenges of urban planning. Would you please put your hands together and welcome to the stage Rachel Smith. And the topic for this talk is technology, disruptors, robots, fear, and our Aussie sense of entitlement. What is the future for parking? Welcome, Rachel.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the sponsors. Thank you very much for the Parking Council for inviting me. And thank you for coming this morning here and listening to me rather than sitting in your hotel room listening to the information about Donald Trump. So all round, thank you very much. Let's get myself ready. Okay, 20 years ago, you could buy eggs, just eggs. And then you could buy eggs from chooks that had broken free, barn eggs. And then you could buy eggs from free-range chickens. And then Mr. Egg came in a biodegradable box. And then you could buy organic, free-range eggs. And now, I know you think it can't go any further or any better, but now you can buy free-range organic eggs from chooks owned by a celebrity chef or reality TV star. Because change is everywhere, and I guess sometimes change is scary, sometimes change is exciting. I'm sure egg producers thought change was scary. Now they think it's really exciting. And so my talk really is a story about change. We're living in some of the most exciting times that we've ever lived in. We're also living in some of the most unpredictable times we've ever seen. So I've got one objective for you today in this hour, is that you go away with one thing, just one thing, that you stop and say, I'd never thought of that before, or holy shit, we don't have that in our business plan. And if you go away with just one thing, then I'll be super happy. What is the future of parking? I don't actually know. But thank you very much for inviting me here. Perth's great. The weather's fantastic. Nice hotel. The food's been great so far. So thank you very much. We've got about 57 minutes left. So I was born in Devon in the UK. And so, sorry, Steve, could I just get you to put the... Oh, you have. Brilliant. Thank you. The timer on, just so we know. So in all seriousness, this is a presentation about change, about doing things differently, about thinking differently. It's a presentation about hope. It's one about being brave. It's about taking risks. And it's about optimism. Tim Smith, the guy who created the Eden Project, that's that big thing in Cornwall in the UK, you know, the big glass domes, lots of plants. You know, he built that with no money and just lied to people. But it was great because he was optimistic and he took all those contractors on the journey with him. They thought he had the money in the bank. He didn't, but he filled them with hope and with passion and with joy, and they kept on going, and everyone thought the money was in the bank. And then they kind of reached this time when, you know, 1 million people had gone through in the first week. It was a huge success. And then people stopped going because they'd already been, and they didn't need to go back again because the plants hadn't grown fast enough for them to go back for a repeat visit. And so he said, well, you know, we'll build an ice rink. And people said, don't build an ice rink. Everyone who builds an ice rink for ice skating goes bust. And he said to his staff, he got them all into a big room like this, about 2,000 people, and he said, we've got two options. We can sit here and we can go bust and you can be made redundant, or we can go down in flames. And he said, you've got two choices, the redundancy or the going down in flames. And he said to his people, what are you going to do? And they said, we'll tell people that everyone who's got an ice skating rink goes bust, so come and watch us, come and see us our ice skating, and we'll go down in flames. And obviously, it's got bigger and better and more people going to the Eden Project. There's a whole car parking story about the Eden Project, which I'm prepared to share with people later. In the last couple of years, I'm only standing here because I put my life savings on the line, risked everything to write a book about solving traffic congestion. And people said, people who self-publish a book, they go bust. And I was like, that's okay, because you've got to give something a try. And engineering's going bust. Everyone's losing their jobs and being made redundant in engineering. So I'm going to give this writing a book and being an author a try. I'm going to be brave and bold. And so the other week I went to London and spoke in the House of Lords. And so the people who said you're a nutter now are like, wow, how do I get to speak in the House of Lords? So it's all about being brave and being different. And of course, accountants all talk about the cost of doing stuff. My accountant's like, no more self-publishing, sell the books you've written. And I'm like, well, what's the cost of not doing things? What's the cost of not writing a children's version of the traffic congestion book? And my accountant's like, we need to have a chat. So I started my career in car parking when I was 13 years old. I started early. So on the day after my 13th birthday, my dad marched me off to the Quince Honey Farm, which is the world's largest working bee farm, and told me to ask for a job. And he stood outside to make sure that I did it. I mean, I'd been working illegally for several years. My parents were entrepreneurs, so, I used to help my mum with her VAT. My dad was a builder, and I could mix cement. So the Quince Honey Farm was a great learning experience in car parking, because when the weather was hot, no one came to the Quince Honey Farm. They all went to the beach because that was free. And on days that it rained, most people who were in Devon on holiday came to the Quince Honey Farm. And when you worked at the Quince Honey Farm and you were 13 years old, you had to be versatile and agile. So you worked in the cafeteria, in the shop, you were putting honey into jars, and you also got the very important role of managing the car park. And the Quince Honey Farm had 3 car parks: the normal car park, the overflow car park, and the overflow car park. And so I learned a lot as a car parking attendant who was 13 years old about demand and supply. I also learned that having an unsealed car park with no line marking is actually a real waste of an asset. So I used to go to the owner, and I used to say, it would be really good if you tarmac this and put lines down, because it would save a lot of time and we'd get more cars into the car park. But he wasn't interested in money. He wasn't interested in spending money. I also learned a lot about that if you actually bribed coach companies with a brown envelope full of money and you gave the bus driver a cream tea and £10 and a jar of honey, they would bring hundreds of old age pensioners to your facility, which in later life, when I was a graduate working for a council and I'd go to theme parks and councils and developers, I was able to say that car parking policy will not work, because what you really need is £10 for the bus driver, a cream tea, a jar of honey and a brown envelope with money in it. So I learned a lot when I was 13 about car parking. So today I'm going to share lots of information with you. I hope it's of value. I hope it's interesting. It's going to be fast. It's going to be furious. People say that listening to me talk is like drinking water from a fire hose. So today's presentation is in 4 parts. So insights into the future. So why we need to be prepared. Inspiration, stories of change. I'm going to be talking about fish and chips because I really like talking about cod and chips. I'm going to share some information about the Australian dream, about real-life research and perspective. Maybe Donald Trump and other people could have listened to me. Actually, Hillary Clinton, actually. Mistakes, sticking points, so why we don't have change, how to create a new normal, and then some real kind of take-home lessons for implementing change and being ready for the future in your business or in your council or in your government department. Okay, insights. So why we need to be prepared for change. And I guess the real take-home story is we don't want the car parking industry or the transport industry or the traffic industry to be like the hotel industry that were blindsided by Airbnb. It's ironic saying this when you're in a really big hotel, but these people didn't see Airbnb coming. So right now our cities are in crisis. The average family spends more time sitting in the car in traffic congestion than they do around the kitchen table or the dining room table. We're inactive. 85% of us aren't even getting 1 hour of exercise or activity a day. We're sick, we're tired, and we're overweight. So, most people have got some kind of ailment or another. We're obese. We're tired, people just say, I'm absolutely exhausted, I can't wait for Saturday when I can just stay in bed and go to sleep. We're working longer and longer hours, we're working flat out, struggling to make ends meet. Most people say, I haven't been on holiday for 3 years. We're in debt. 60% of Australians can't afford to pay their credit cards. 40% of people are living off money from friends and family and payday loans. The average Australian owns $32,000 and the average salary is $67,000. So you don't need to be a mathematical genius to work out that's a little bit of an imbalance. We're materialistic and we're addicted to consumerism, which just creates huge amounts of chaos in our cities. But something we really need to think about in town planning, that 10% of people have got storage units to hold the shit that they can't put in their house, that they've bought on a credit card that they can't afford to pay the bill for, and now they've got it in a storage unit down the road, even though they don't actually use it. And obviously, job insecurity is a threat for all of us. Every day you open the newspaper, there's something about your job being automated. So this basically is us, not a particularly pretty sight. And then there are lots of new trends and kind of circumstances that most of us don't even know exist. So this is a lady called Lynn. I've got a book called Underspent because I didn't buy anything in 2014, but that's another story that we'll talk about later. And so this lady, Lynn, calls me up. She'd contacted me through Facebook and said, could she have a chat? So I gave her my phone number, she phoned me. So she's in her early 50s. Her husband came home from work one night and said, I would like a divorce. We need to both move out of this house. They sold their house. They paid off all their debts. They didn't actually have any money left. So here's Lynn. She's 52. She's never had a job. And so she was saying, I have to go and live in a shared house. And what do you think that will be like? And I said, I don't know, because I've not lived in a shared house since I was a graduate. And, the thought of queuing for the bathroom and having my shelf in the fridge fills me with terror. And so I was really fascinated with, is this a new urban trend that none of us actually know about? So I contacted some real estate agents, and then I went to Flatshare, and I said to them, is this thing, this phenomenon of women and men in their 40s and 50s sharing in shared houses, is that new? Is that a norm? Or is it just something that's an outlier? And they said between 20 and 25% of people, or of their registered users on flatshare.com in Australia, are men and women in their 40s and their 50s. And I was like, okay. And they were like, this is because of things like divorce and redundancy, that the world and our demographics as we know them are changing considerably. And so I thought, well, are councils doing anything to address this? Do they even know it's happening? And so I went through councils in Australia on their websites. Not one single council, from what I can see, and I may not have checked every single policy and land use plan for every council in Australia, no one has addressed this. But this is something which is growing hugely. Again, we can't afford to be blindsided by not understanding the trends that are upon us now in Australia. And then there's change. And so global megatrends are some of the things most beyond our control. The ABC Four Corners TV program, which was on a couple of months ago, said that 40% of jobs in Australia are able to be automated in the next 10 to 15 years. We've got other organisations such as the CSIRO and Dent Global and the New Economics Foundation saying that 49% of jobs are able to be automated in the next 5 to 7 years. This year, the first generation of baby boomers turned 70. Baby boomers own 2/3 of all the assets in Australia, so investment properties, capital, assets. As baby boomers start turning 70, so they start selling down their assets, which is going to change the demand and the supply of everything. And with that, we see a shift towards access rather than ownership, with a rise in the phenomenons, I can never say that word, like Airtasker, Airbnb, and Uber. These people are only just warming up. And of course, we see from things like Brexit and yesterday that the general public are pissed off and frustrated. So we don't know what change is going to happen. I was just doing a series of workshops with some bus operators in Queensland a couple of months ago, and they were just, we're doing all the finance and economic stuff and demographics, and you go through that kind of stuff, and these people just sat up and said, we don't have this kind of stuff in our business plans. Maybe we're not thinking about these kind of insights enough, and really we need to be thinking seriously about this stuff. There are entrepreneurs in London and in New York and in Australia really nailing this stuff, and we need to as well. And then there are trends that are changing our job security and creating job insecurity. When I was growing up, I grew up in a little tiny market town in the southwest of England. There were 2 factories, and most of the dads worked there, or they were self-employed, and all the mums got jobs within walking distance of home. Back then, there were jobs for life. Most people I know, myself included, are just doing temporary contracts, going from one temporary contract to the next. And there's no job security in that. It's possible that we are the last generation of people to work in an office. I've got heaps of friends who are entrepreneurs who work in Bali now, and they've got all of their team are people working through Fiverr and stuff. They pay them $5 an hour. Running an office in Bali is way cheaper than running an office here. And virtual is a reality. I just published my 4th book. I was doing some changes through one of the platforms that feeds it out to Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes & Noble, and there was a problem with some of the dot points in one of the lists. And I kept going back and rejecting it and going in and writing the comments. 4 or 5 times I did this, and I was like, who is the idiot on the other end who cannot get the dot point straight? Isn't it obvious? And on about the 5th go, I actually got to email someone. And they were in the States, I think. I'm not sure. And I said, don't your people read the email? And he said to me, it was probably how your sentence was structured. And I thought, it wasn't a person doing that. It was AI. So already a robot can edit and format and proofread a book. So, and lots of legal companies will tell you that a legal clerk can review a contract with 60% accuracy. AI and IBM Watson can proofread and review contracts at 98% accuracy. And I'm sure that's happening with lots of things that we're already doing. So technology, disruptors, artificial intelligence, the robots are already here. Things are changing really quickly. I went to a seminar on Saturday about Facebook. The guy had spent $960,000 on Facebook advertising. He's got various different companies. He's used it so much and knows the back end of Facebook so much that Facebook took him to the States. He said Facebook are going to put satellites up in the sky to give the internet to countries that don't already have access to the internet, but they're only going to give them access to Facebook, which means in the next 3 or 4 years, another 3 to 4 billion users will come online to Facebook, which, you know, it's now, I was just like, Facebook, you don't want to advertise your business there. Now I'm like, okay, Facebook is the place to go to do your advertising. There was talk on Saturday about Facebook and Uber creating a partnership that in the future you'll book your Uber trip through Facebook, because Facebook knows exactly what you're doing, when you're doing it, and what you're going to do before you know what you're going to do, and Uber can take you there. So it's those kind of partnerships that we really need to be thinking about in the future. And then there's heaps of trends happening, you know, about job security and the future. You know, we hear lots of people in Europe and in the States talking about the universal basic income, which is going to disrupt car parking and transport and travel everywhere. So, you know, we need to just open our eyes and be aware of all of these things. But it's not all bad news, and it's definitely not doom and gloom. I remember when I first started as a road safety officer, the first conference I went to, the keynote speaker started the day by saying, if we always do what we always did, we'll always get what we always got. And we're in one of the most exciting times we've ever lived in, but it's all about riding the crest of the wave. It's much like surfing. We can make sure that we're on the wave and we're heading towards the beach. We don't want to be in the group that misses the wave and they weren't quite ready and got left behind, and we definitely don't want to be the people out the back who get totally left behind. So this guy sitting down on the floor is a guy called Joe Hatchiban. He's an Irishman who lives in Berlin, and he pretends he doesn't speak German. But Joe Hatchiban is really passionate about music and live music, and also about public spaces. And he went to the mayor in Berlin and he said, Mauer Park, it's really shit. The grass is knee deep. You've got this stone amphitheatre which no one uses. Can I go to Mauer Park and do something with music? And the mayor was like, you want to do karaoke? And Joe Hatchiban said yes. And so he started one Sunday afternoon in January, providing karaoke to the people of Berlin in Mauer Park in the Stone Amphitheatre. He now has between 5,000 and 10,000 people going there every Sunday afternoon. It's in the top 10 things to do in Berlin. And, you know, marketing companies and councils look to Joe Hatchiban, you know, because they spend millions trying to get people to go into city centres and go to parks for fireworks and things. Joe Hatchiban just turns up with his MacBook Air, a USB stick and 2 speakers on his bike, and thousands of people come. And really the story about Joe Hatchiban is you just need one person to ignite the fuse for change. The second story of change is a guy called Peter Fraser. He owns a fish and chip shop in Falmouth in the UK, and Peter Fraser was really passionate about cod. But more importantly, he was passionate about conserving cod, because he said everyone has cod and chips. No one has another fish and chips. So he sent cod on holiday. So he got one of his team members dressed up in a cod suit. He put them on a boat. They went out to sea. All the media came. And all the other fish and chip shop owners said, you're absolutely barking mad and nuts. They said, because this is in the middle of the summer season when we make all our money. We're in the middle of the biggest recession we've ever seen in the UK, and you've sent cod on holiday. And he said, but I want people to eat other fish and chips, not cod and chips. And every night for 2 weeks, he had more people queuing to get into his fish and chip shop than he'd ever had before. He made more money than he'd ever made before, and all the other fish and chip shops were a little bit annoyed. And the story about Peter Fraser is it's about communicating with people in a positive way. It would have been really easy to say, do not eat cod, eat whatever. But he did it in a fun and a positive way, which really inspired people to make a change. And the third story of change is a share shop in Berlin. So if you need an extra chair, or you need some kids' toys, or you need to use a gardening stuff, you can go along to the share shop and you can borrow something, much like going to your library and borrowing a book. And we went there when I was doing a project called the BMW Guggenheim Lab, and lots of people, and it was run by a guy, you know, he was like an anti-capitalist guy, as you would expect in Berlin. And so, you know, it wasn't like really neat like a David Jones department store. And lots of ladies and men said, oh, it's a bit messy, it looks a bit like junky. And a lady turned around and she said, we need to learn now, because when we're in a crisis, or it's a disaster, we won't have time to learn. And that sentence just resonated with me for so long, because it's really important that we learn now to do things differently whilst we've got time. So information, why we need to get ready for change. So this was the Australian dream, the great Australian dream, you know, to own your own house with a white picket fence. And then people thought they deserved more. So people got a bigger house and a bigger mortgage. And then we thought, well, you know, I don't want to live in the not so great house in the street. I want to live in the best house in the street. So lots of people that thought they deserved even more. So they moved to an even bigger house because, you know, you don't want to be upstaged by your neighbours. And so then people started moving further and further away so that they could have a bigger and bigger house. In southeast Queensland, we know that 50% of people are prepared to live miles and miles and miles away from where they work to have a bigger house and a smaller mortgage, and are happy to pay car parking and to be stuck in traffic for an hour and a half each way each day, because what they're really valuing is the bigger house and the smaller mortgage. So, you know, congestion and car parking, it's all a trade-off and understanding what people really value. And of course, people have to live a lot further away to have a bigger house and a cheaper mortgage, because now everyone needs to have a media room. And of course, then everyone needed to have an outside kitchen, because you can't have just use an indoor kitchen when you have a barbecue. You need to have the outdoor kitchen next to the indoor kitchen, which has, you know, completely disrupted land use planning and house design. And, you know, years ago, Bruce was happy with his tin boat. But then one of his neighbours got a better boat. And so, you know, Bruce had to upgrade. And then you find that one of your neighbours or one of your Facebook friends has got a bigger boat, so then you have to go and buy a bigger boat as well, because, you know, it's not called Gloat Book for no reason at all. And imagine the shame when your friends have got that and you've got a little tin boat. So what's happened is the Australian dream is now where normal is getting dressed in clothes you buy for work and driving through traffic in a car that you're still paying for in order to get to the job you need to pay for the clothes in the car, and the house you leave vacant all day so that you can afford to live in it. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the Australian dream. And, you know, I used to work somewhere last year where people, you know, they were engineers in an engineering consultancy. You know, they weren't, you know, they were on good salaries. You know, they wouldn't pay to park. Everyone would run out and do the 2-hour parking. So, you know, 4 times a day on the hour, iPhone alarms were going off left, right and centre so people could run outside and move their car. You know, they had little syndicates going where you would swap places, car parking spaces with everyone else, because people were living so far away just to get a different house. So now we've got lots of this, and we spend not very much time doing this. And obviously, it's meant that Australia is a place, like many Western societies around the world, where we're kind of in debt, we're depressed, and we're tired, and we're stressed, and we're working really long hours. So I'm really passionate about the intersection between urban and transport planning, about modern lifestyles, and about saving money. I'm really passionate about saving money. So when I was writing my book, Decongestion, I realised it was really important to go out and listen to real people, because I was reading lots of research and lots of urban and transport planning that I thought, well, maybe this is a little bit skewed to people who are writing these plans, that they're almost putting their own assumptions in. So I was like, well, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, used them in that ratio. So I went out and did lots of listening. So I spoke to hundreds and hundreds of people. I could well have spoken to some people in this room. So I spoke to planners and public servants and people in consultancies and businesses, and then just random people. People started running away from me when they saw me coming down the street because they're like, it's her, she's asking questions. Because I wanted to really understand about car parking and traffic and transport and how we move around. Because it's really important to understand what people really think before we start to make change or plan change or to plan a business. And so let's take cycling for an example of 3 lessons. So People, when you go overseas, people just love, they're like, is that really the Prime Minister? It's like, well, actually, when the ambulance service pick you up in Australia now, they don't actually ask you who the Prime Minister is because people can't remember, because it changes so often. But people want to do things that are normal and mainstream. So people don't want to, wander around in pink lycra. And so people don't want to stand out, they really want to blend in. And I think that's a really important thing to remember for car parking, because people are really scared and frightened about car sharing and carpooling. And, we've got lots of carpool or lift share car parks, but people are almost too scared to use them. It's just like, oh, I don't know about this. Also, cycling was marginalised. So we have what I call the Great Australian Paint Job, where we just put a little bit of paint down, and we expect, 8-year-old kids to cycle to school on that. And the people drive over it, they park over it. And so again, with kind of car parking, it's understanding what people want and what they're going to use. People say, well, people don't use that cycling infrastructure. It's like, have you looked at it? It's not safe for, normal average people to use. Yeah, it's fine for the people who get up and cycle 200 kilometers before they have their breakfast. Those people are really brave and really fearless, but your average person isn't actually going to use that. And it's looking at those kind of groups and people's wants and needs for car parking as well. And obviously, cycling discriminates people. We would never ask a motorist to get out of their car and push their car across an intersection, but engineers seem to think it's okay for cyclists to get off, their bike and push their bike around every arm of an intersection. So again, it's understanding from users of car parks what's really usable for them and what they're going to use. So as I said, I go out and I ask lots of people. I call myself a researcher, an author, and a speaker because I go out and speak to hundreds and thousands of people, and I find out what the real problems are. I write a book about it, and then I go and speak about it. I'm not a research organisation. I do everything for free. People go, oh, I couldn't do that. It costs too much money. It's too much time. It's like, yeah, you've got lots of free resources, Twitter, Facebook, social, LinkedIn. I just put questions up. I say, I'm looking for 500 people, which means you get 1,000 people coming back to you, because people really want to be part of something, and they want to share their story, and they want people to hear their issues. So please go out there and ask people what they want and need. You'll be absolutely inundated. I get people phoning me from the States saying, I've got 50 people who'd like to talk to you. Can we set up a webinar and a Skype? And I'm just like, wow, why aren't marketing companies and councils and governments doing this? People are desperate to be heard. So for my book, Decongestion, I just need to go forward and then back. I put these in the wrong order. So I went out and I said to people, what's going wrong with traffic congestion? Why, what are the mistakes? Where are we going wrong? And so people said, I can tell you, I'm a normal person who drives to work and parks my car, and I can tell you why we've got so much congestion. So our alternatives to the car are unattractive. People say the bus is unreliable, doesn't turn up, it goes early, which means then I have to stand and wait for the next bus. And so with the car, it's great because I know it's there, it's parked right outside of my house. We underestimate the importance of vision and leadership. So lots of people say, you know, we just react to this, then something happens over here and we react to that, then something else happens over there and everyone runs over there to sort out that thing, and something happens over here, so we all run over there and do that, and we're not doing anything proactively. And loads of people in our communities are saying, we want planning to be proactive, not reactive. Obviously, our lives in Australia have been created around the car. You know, you can't have the outdoor kitchen and live in the CBD. So really working out again what people really value and what they want the most important things in their lives to be. We're too rigid, so, you know, everyone starts work at 8:30 and everyone goes home at 5 o'clock. I mean, you don't need to be a traffic modeler to work out that ain't going to work. Obviously, we've got our low-density land use. Loads of people said parking is too cheap and too easy. People were like, why would I walk to the train station and catch the train and walk at the other end, you know, when I can park my car for $10 a day? In the building that I work in, there's a secure car park. If the secure people are here, it's awesome because the price keeps going down. And so, you know, even I'm like, well, it looks really bad if I drive. But there's been a few times I've had to go and do things in the evening where I'm like, actually, it's really contestable now to drive the car and then go, because I worked out, you know, then I walk to the station, get the train, go home, then go back out again. I'm like, do you know what? Secure have got a really great deal. I'm going to drive my car in. And I feel really bad about that, but it's just so cheap and so easy that even I'm, you know, converted. And then people are saying, and particularly professionals and practitioners, that we fail to understand the causes of congestion. You know, there is no silver bullet to solve all of this overnight. And, you know, when I've spoken to people, the thing with traffic and parking, it's all about time. People are like, I can buy anything. You know, we're in some of the most affluent times we've ever had, but people are like, I can't buy time. And that's the one thing I really want. And Jacob and I were talking about that last night. You know, it's all about time. It comes down to time at the end of the day. So, as I said, this is all the information that I had from people and practitioners and businesses and consultancies and councils and governments. So then I was like, right, I'm going to go to the mayors and the councillors now. So I just contacted loads and loads of mayors and councillors, and because people don't do that, but, you know, it's like, well, what the hell? They're just a normal person. So I contacted them and I said, I'm doing some research, can I speak to you? And actually, loads of mayors and councillors actually really wanted to talk as well. And I said to them, well, do you know, what do you think the biggest challenges for you are in cutting traffic congestion? And they were like, oh, no one's asked us that before. And I was like, well, I am now, so let's go. So they said it was providing good public transport. So I said, we're always going to have traffic congestion until we've got really good public transport. They said we need to integrate transport and land use planning. We need to restrict car parking and car use. So, you know, they were like, you know, we need to be like Bogota, where you can only drive in a couple of times a day and then other days you have to do an alternative. They were like, we have this message that the car is the only desirable way to travel. But, you know, it's really difficult because the car companies like Audi and BMW have got really big budgets, and the council doesn't have the kind of budget, and the marketing companies or, you know, marketing associates that someone like Audi would have. But they were like, you know, we really need to change how we're talking and the language that we use. We need to build infrastructure for all modes of transport, and we need to get businesses to stagger their working hours. And that really applies to car parks because, as I said, the car park that I used a few times, you know, 6 o'clock, there's no one in there, and then it's empty again until like 6 o'clock the next morning. Well, that's a wasted asset. If I owned a car park, I'd be making sure that, you know, I worked at the honey farm when I was 13. I know I would be using it in a more efficient and a more effective way. You know, they're building tower blocks everywhere, you know, in the CBD. Well, if I was a developer, I'd be going to a car parking company and saying, well, we could put more units in and less car parking, and they could use your car park at night. And then the final reason was the convenience of the car. And loads of mayors and councillors were saying, well, actually, we probably need to go to people and say, you know, how about just having a go at walking to the footy, or cycling to the football, or, going to get your paper on a Sunday, on the bike and stuff. And I was talking about that on the radio this morning with the ABC. The Perth Stadium's a great example. Do things when you've, ride your bike or use the bus or something when you've got time. It's easy to do things on a Saturday. It's harder during the week with, going to work, taking kids to school and all of those other things. So that book, Jam Packed, is on my website. You can download it for free. You can give it to 1 million people if you so wish. Share it around. You can copy it. You can do whatever you like. That's fine. So I was really interested in redundancy. All my friends in the UK were like, I've been made redundant 3 times. It's really cool, because now when you go to a dinner party, it's who's been made redundant the most times. And so engineering was changing quite rapidly in Australia. And so I became really interested in what are the tipping points for people to change their money and their lifestyle. And also about this whole kind of automation and technology. So I started interviewing people about redundancy and how they changed their spending habits. And lots of people came to me and said, oh, well, you've never been made redundant. It's really inappropriate for you to write about this. So then in December, my manager came to me and he said, sorry, your role's going to be made redundant. You can either go to Wellington or Sydney, or you can take a redundancy. And I was like, awesome. And he said, no one's ever said that before. And I was like, because now I can go ahead and write the redundancy book. And it was great. I got a job the next day, put the money in the bank. And so I was like, right, I can really go out now and interview people and industries about redundancy. Because now, I was in the club. And and because people were really, it's a really taboo subject and people don't like talking about it. And the other 199 people who got made redundant on the same day as me didn't have the same kind of outlook, but because it's, a taboo subject. So I was like, well, are people really worried about the future and technology and disruptors and robots, or are they not? So again, I took to Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, and I said, I really like to interview people. I never interview people I know, so they have to be 2 removed or 1 removed, because it's really inappropriate to speak to people about money and job security and things to people who you might be going to the pub with. So I asked people 3 questions. Will automation make or break your industry? Are you worried and scared and nervous about the future? And if so, why? And what will you do in the next few years if your job is automated? So I asked people in the public sector, the private sector, and people with businesses. So a real kind of broad spectrum of people. So people in America, in the UK, in Australia, and New Zealand. And I was horrified when I got the results. So 85% of people don't think automation is even coming. So there were people who were teachers who were saying, oh, well, education's not going to go online. It's like, my sister used to watch the Open University when she was 5 in 1980-something. We've had the Open University on the telly in the UK since, the Dark Ages. So probably is, so women were much more concerned and think it's going to happen. Men don't think it's going to happen at all. People were like, I'm a drafter, I do CAD. I started off doing drawing when I left school. I've worked my way up to the CAD team leader in a consultancy. This isn't going to happen. And I was just like, wow, okay. 54% of people say they're not worried or scared, and they think, everything's just going to plod along as it is. 46% of people said that they are actually really, really scared and worried about the unpredictable times and the uncertainty of change. Women were 5 times more worried than men. And 65% of people don't have a plan and don't have any money for the future. And that's businesses as well. So only 35% of people and businesses have a plan and financial security for the future. And I was like, wow, okay, I was not expecting that. which kind of then made me think about, well, what are the mistakes that we're making? So the first one is that we're blissfully unaware. There's this guy called Vanderchuck. He's a big media marketing guy in the States. And at the beginning of the year, he said the desktop computer is dead. We're going to be doing everything on a mobile phone. And this was in like January or February. And I thought, this guy's nuts. You know, he's just spent his whole time on computers doing, online and digital marketing. He was like, in 3 or 4 years' time, we won't have desktop computers at all. And I was just like, some of these guys are just way too. And then Pokemon Go comes out. And, people who were sitting on a Saturday doing computer gaming on a desktop computer or a laptop are now outside doing their stuff on a mobile phone. And I was thinking, yeah, we need to listen to these people because these people are really looking at the trends and the changes. So people are just like, well, I don't know. And I'm just like, wow. We've just got to be listening to these futurists and these trend spotters and what they're saying and what they're predicting. The second thing is that we're too focused on perfection. And so people say, oh, well, I'm not going to do that until, this is perfect and that's perfect and I've mowed the lawn and I've Marie Kondo'd my wardrobe so I've got a capsule wardrobe. We haven't got time to wait for the perfect situation. As I said, I was in the House of Lords a couple of weeks ago, and there are a couple of other speakers after me, and one of the ladies was saying, if we have like calls for action, and people go, oh, yeah, I'll do that when I get home, yeah, after I've washed up and unloaded the dishwasher. And she said, you don't need to wait for the perfect situation, just have a go now. So, people, I've done my books and I do blogs, and, I could wait until maybe I'm a perfectionist at Facebook ads before I start doing things, but I just start having a go because we don't have time to hang around. People are far too scared to act. People are just like, whoa, the world's changing. People in engineering, I'm not dissing engineers, but, people in engineering, they're just like, oh, the industry's dying. And then the next morning they come back into work and it's like, what did you do last night? Oh, I watched My Kitchen Rules. And then, what's that house one? And then, whatever the other program is. And it's like, well, you can listen to like a podcast or something. Jacob and I were talking about this again last night. Podcasts and learn stuff. Don't go home and be too scared to act because it will just be too late. Not being financially prepared. So, 35% of people don't have any money. Oh, no, only 35% of money. People have money for the future. And being personally irresponsible. People blame it on someone else. I have those frigging taxi people tweeting me and spamming me on Twitter all the time. I'm like, I'm nothing to do with Uber. I use taxis sometimes, I use Uber sometimes. They're so angry, they're just spamming people all the time. It's like, don't blame someone else. You should have been looking. Uber were around for a long time, they were doing stuff. Don't shout and complain at other people now. Your service was rubbish sometimes, so don't blame other people. So we've got to be all personally responsible for the future. So my story, what gives me right to stand up here, I've got to be really quick now. So I came to Australia in 2007 to work on this thing called the Western Brisbane Transport Network investigation. And I realised that Brisbane had lots of preserved transport corridors. So I had this idea for 7-metre wide cycling superhighways. People were like, she's a POM, she's mad. And so I applied to the AITPM because they had a research grant. And I said, I want to go to Bogota and see the best busways and the best cycleways in the world. So I contacted loads of people and I said, I'm going to Bogota. I want to meet Enrique Peñalosa. And loads of people contacted me and said, someone like you doesn't meet someone like him. So I contacted loads of people in New York and I said, I'm going to Bogota, I'd like to meet Enrique. And loads of people like you don't meet people like him. So after about the 25th person had said that, I went to Flight Centre and booked a flight and went to Flight Centre, booked my flight to Bogota. And I contacted loads of people and I said, I'm going to be in Bogota from these dates. I'm staying in this backpackers hostel. If anyone can, get me a coffee with Enrique, that would be great. So I get there on my first day. The lady who manages the backpackers hostel came running to my dorm. She said, Enrique's on the phone. He'd like to speak to you. And so I went to see him and we went around Bogota and he put my name forward. He thought the cycling superhighways were great. He put me forward for a project called the BMW Guggenheim Lab. So we spent 9 weeks in New York, in Berlin and in Mumbai talking about cities of the future. And it was when I was in Mumbai, so people were really, in New York and in Berlin, people were really interested about sharing and public space. In Mumbai, the women particularly were saying, I want somewhere private where I can take my children and talk to them without my husband and my extended family hearing what I'm saying. So it was there that I decided not to buy anything new or second-hand, and so I did this year of no buying. I'm trying to flick through it really quickly now. So then I got invited to do a TED Talk. And they said, we'd like you to talk about the new Australian dream. And I said, and at that time I didn't have my Australian passport. I said, it's probably a little bit off for a POM to tell Australians what their new dream should be. But how about I tell people why we don't have a new Australian dream and what the 7 sticking points are. So this is what I created. And the first is fear. So Sir Ken Robinson, who has the most watched TED Talk ever, says that if we want to be creative and have change, we've got to be prepared to fail and do things differently. So, because we'll never have change if we're just scared. And so the second thing is too many choices. So, years ago, people lived and worked close together. Now we've got so many choices available to us. Years ago, you used to go to your granny's for Christmas. People didn't go off to Bali and sit on the beach at Christmas. You just went to your grandma's, and that's what you did. Now there's so much choice available to us that we actually question everything and do nothing. We've got this huge sense of entitlement now in Australia where, everyone thinks they're entitled to this big house and 10 investment properties, free parking, not to be held up in traffic congestion. And so all that's created is this big explosion of whinging and complaining, and no one's actually solving or even thinking about the real big urban issues that face everyone. The fourth is our need for instant fixes. And I always talk about my friend John here. So my friend John is a cycling advocate, and he writes to the council every single day. That's his place in life. And that's great. The council, they like having people who write to them every single day. But I keep saying to John, while they're writing to you and you've got this great pen palling going on, it means the people in the council aren't doing the job that they're paid for. And lots of people who write to the council every day also don't realise that correspondence has to go all the way up the chain and all the way back down. And if by any chance there was a comma in the wrong place, it has to go all the way back up the chain again and all the way back down. So, one letter to John could take 3 days of administration in the council. And when John writes to the council every day, that's a lot of letters. And so by just focusing on these little instant fixes of solving this over here and then going over to solve that over here, we're not actually doing cycle planning or any strategic planning. We're just jumping from shiny thing to shiny thing and fixing nothing. Obviously, now in our modern world, we're all so busy liking on Facebook, liking someone else's dream and someone else's future plans. My friend Amy and I created a thing called Lazy Sunday Cycle, which was normal people getting dressed up in normal clothes and cycling around. And, it was great in the beginning. And, we got 500 likes on Facebook, and just Amy and I went for the bike ride. The next month we had 800 likes on Facebook, and just Amy and I turned up to the bike ride. And then, we were over 1,000 likes on Facebook, and we were like, wow, we're just smashing this. And still, just Amy and I turned up for the bike ride. And because Facebook is a fake recruiter. We're exhausted, so 53% of us say that we're constantly exhausted, so we're not actually planning our businesses or our cities for the future because all we're doing is counting down the hours until bedtime. And then there's navel gazing. I am sure there are traffic modelers in this country who know what colour car and the registration plate of a car at the intersection out there that's turning right on the 3rd Thursday of March in 2031. But then what happens is people like Uber come along and disrupt everything. And we're so frigging concentrating on, that orange car turning left with a, whatever registration plate that we miss the big stuff. We're just completely blindsided. So to create a new normal, we have to be positive. Talk about the things that we can do. We need to create an appetite for change. Lots of people are desperate to pay off their mortgage really quickly. Lots of people have got driveways. Why aren't we doing more of that kind of matching car parking and people's driveways? Overcome people's anxieties. I got interviewed by the Western Australian yesterday, and the guy was like, we've got carpooling car parks, but only 3 cars. And it's like, well, because people think that if they carpool with someone, the carpool is going to be an axe murderer. And actually, there's some great stories of lift sharing and carpooling from the UK where it's just with the workplace that you work with, or it's people in your neighbourhood. You don't have to go out and knock on every single door of people in the neighbourhood where you live. And then obviously helping people to build new habits. When I was doing walking buses, like the walking to school bus in the UK, I'd go to the parents and say, you can only do the walking to school bus on a Wednesday morning. And they were like, yeah, well, we might want to do it more. And I was like, out of those 10 trips, going to and from school 5 days a week, you only do it once. I forbid you to do it any other time. And if I see you doing it any more than a Wednesday morning, I will take your walking to school bus insurance away, and I'll stop you doing it. And they were like, oh, hang on a minute. I was like, people join the gym in January, they go for 2 weeks, and they never go back again for the rest of the year. If you just do something 1 out of 10, it's sustainable and it will last forever. And there are some walking buses that we started in about 2005, which are still going strong now. We need to be like Jamie Oliver. We need to seek to understand first, understand what people want, what they need, and what their values are. And we need to be like Sarah Wilson. We don't want to be saying, don't do this. We need to invite people to join the movement of what we're trying to do and change and disruption. So as I said, I didn't buy anything new or secondhand. In 2014, I saved 38% of my take-home salary. When I first started doing this, people were like, this is hippie shit, absolutely crazy. And then people were like, oh, hang on a minute, you saved actually quite a lot of money. I'm an engineer, I've got 4 kids, a mortgage. We can't put our hands on $50 cash. I actually want to find out how you did this. So it's all about creating change in a different way. So implementation, I'm going to just run over a little bit, but I'll be really quick. So why we need to be ready for the future, because the future is now. So we need to I'm going to talk about hotels, learnings from decongestion, and why we need to plan our cities for women like Lynn. So what can we learn from Airbnb and hotels? Well, we need to pay attention to what's emerging. Just like I said, that guy was saying, desktop computers are dead. We'll do everything on our mobile phone in the future. We really need to be watching. Facebook's watching us 24/7. They know exactly what people are doing, when they're doing it, and they're really building those trends into their business. We need to learn to fail fast. So try things, do it quickly and cheaply. We need to seek to understand the real issues. So, one of the real big health problems is inactivity. But health departments and transport have been ploughing millions into obesity. But the problem is inactivity, not obesity. We need to have meaningful conversations with people, so people using our car parks or people in our communities about what they really want and what they need. And we need to make decisions based on data. So Netflix got rid of 32% of their films in the last 2 years because they don't want to be carrying stuff that people don't want. So really looking at the data and using it smartly and efficiently. So just a few quick learnings from decongestion. So as I said, The first thing is to ignite the fuse for change. And, the problem is that we need to tackle these big problems of disruptors and change and technology and be brave and have a vision for the future. If you got onto a plane and the pilot said, I don't know where we're going, but we're going somewhere, chances are most people would unbuckle their seatbelt and ask to get off that plane straight away. But most businesses and most councils and most governments don't have a flight plan or a vision for the future. The second, is to communicate in a positive way and to really go out there and listen to people. We were doing some work with the kind of bus companies in southeast Queensland a while ago, and all the surveys were coming up about the thing most people were concerned about. And this just shows how kind of questionnaires and data can kind of be skewed and stuff, that the thing most people were happy about was the driver wasn't smoking whilst driving. And it's like, well, that should be a given, surely. That shouldn't be coming out in our list as the number one thing. When I went to the focus groups and spoke to real people, they had two real big grievances that hadn't come out in any of the questionnaires. That was the jerky brakes. So they were like, I hate it when the drivers are really jerky on the brakes. And I want the driver to say hello. So people were like, I use public transport if I get on the bus and the driver says hello. We need to discover what's on our own doorstep. I went down to Hobart last year, and the market down on the Salamanca. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. I had like a senior moment then. They were like, we want more and more car parking. We want car parks everywhere in Hobart so people can go to the market on a Saturday. And I was like, do you really want car parking or do you want people? And they were like, yeah, I didn't think about that. I want you, the people, I don't want your car. And so again, we need to learn to do things differently while we have time. Sharing's great, but we really need to share. That's not in our culture, in our psyche. 400 houses in a suburb, we've got 400 lawnmowers. It's not people's, normal life to go and ask their neighbour for a lawnmower. My next door neighbour, or the people in my street, when they see me coming, you can see them shutting their garage door. They're like, oh, she wants something again. But people don't like that going and asking. It was only because I lived in Berlin, which is the anti-capitalist centre of the world, that you have it in your kind of demeanour that it's okay to go and ask. I'd go to cafes and say, oh, I'm having a dinner party, I don't have enough plates, can I borrow them? And I'm like, yeah, just go out in the kitchen and borrow. But you wouldn't go, to the casino and say, can I borrow some tables and chairs? I've got, the family coming round for a barbecue on Saturday. We need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and really make sure that our business plans and our policies reflect real life. I did a project with the Gold Coast, or the City of Gold Coast Council a couple of years ago, and we had this workshop about how far people were prepared to travel. And in their policies, and they've got a great transport strategy and some great plans, but people would ride their bikes or walk to the train station, get the train to Brisbane and then walk at the other end. And I said to them, well, in this workshop, if it was Wednesday night and it was like 9 o'clock and there's no milk and bread for breakfast the next morning and you need to make your kids pack lunches, how far would you be prepared to walk for milk and bread? And they said 2 minutes. So I was like, you've got to make sure that the policy you're thinking or what you're trying to ask other people to do really fits with what people will do and what you're prepared to do, and making sure that whole time thing is included. And then remembering the cultural literacy. So, people say, I want Australia to be like Copenhagen, but, their lifestyle and their housing and their lifestyle is very different to theirs. So we need to make sure that everything fits with what we're doing. And as for Lynn, I'll just be 2 minutes. What do people, these women in house sharing, what can we really learn from Lynn? And I think Lynn is a really important person to kind of really think about. So we need to acknowledge that modern lifestyles are very different to the norm. We need to be led by what's really happening out there in our cities, not by assumptions or what we think is happening. We need to ask people what they really want and what they really need and provide for them appropriately. We need to understand people's biggest worries. Lots of people are really worried about how they're going to pay their mortgage or how they're going to get to work or how they're going to keep their job. We need to pay attention to people's complaints because people's complaints really give us an understanding of what's happening in transport and in parking and in mobility. We need to really learn from reality, not what the media tells us. So, if you believe what the media says, we're all living in $1 million house and earning $2 million a year, and that's not true. And we really need to be ahead of the curve and really look at change so that we're not left behind. And I'm just going to skip over that one. My just kind of thought is, why not? What's the cost of not being prepared and not being ready for the future? Thank you very much.